My name is Zara Okafor. I am 28 years old. I want to start with the morning of my sister's wedding. Not because it is where the story ends. The story does not end there in the specific neat way of stories that end at a single moment. But the morning of my sister's wedding is where I understood, with a particular completeness I had not had before, what 4 years of carrying something quietly had built, and what that building meant for the specific morning when my phone rang at 6:47 and Priya's voice was on the other end of it, and she said the words I had not expected her to say. She said, "Zara, I need you." She had not called me in 4 years, not on my birthday, not at Christmas, not when our father had his minor cardiac episode last year. We had been in the same rooms at family gatherings, the particular awkward proximity of sisters who are not speaking and who are both maintaining the performance of normalcy for parents who do not fully understand what happened between them. But she had not called me in 4 years, and the call at 6:47 on the morning of her wedding was the first call. I was in my studio apartment in Austin, Texas, where I had moved 18 months after what happened. The specific relocation of someone who needed distance from a city that contained too much context. I was 24 when I moved to Austin. I was 28 when the phone rang. She said, "I need you. Her professional photographer canceled this morning. Food poisoning. She cannot stand up. The ceremony is in 4 hours, and I have no photographer, and I have 400 guests, and the only photographer I trust with this day is you." I said, "Priya." She said, "I know what I'm asking." I said, "Do you?" She said, "Yes." I said, "Say it specifically. Tell me what you're asking, specifically." She said, "I'm asking the sister I hurt to come and photograph the most important day of my life, because she is the best photographer I know, and because I don't deserve to ask her, and I'm asking anyway." I sat with my phone in my hand in my apartment in Austin, and I thought about 4 years and about the specific morning 4 years ago, and about what Priya had done and what it had cost me, and what I had built from what it had cost me. Before I tell you what I said to Priya and what happened at her wedding, let me take you to the beginning. Because the beginning is where the specific shape of everything that followed was established, and because the beginning is where I first understood what kind of sister I had, and what kind of love she was capable of, and what the specific limits of that love looked like when the limits were reached. I grew up in Dallas, Texas, the older of 2 daughters born to Emmanuel and Sunita Okafor, who had met at a graduate program in Houston in 1991, and who had built their life in Dallas in the specific way of a Nigerian Indian family, in the Dallas professional community of the 1990s and 2000s, organized around dual professional careers and the particular expectation of achievement that characterized families where both parents had built significant things from their own effort and who expected their daughters to do the same. My father was a cardiologist. My mother was a software engineer who had spent her career at technology companies in the Dallas area and who had the particular systematic intelligence of someone who had spent 30 years solving specific complex problems through the application of rigorous method. Together, they produced 2 daughters who were both highly capable and who expressed their capability in very different registers. Priya was the specific kind of high-achieving person who achieved in the particular way that the achievement was always visible. She was beautiful and she was warm, and she was the daughter who walked into rooms and produced the specific response in those rooms of people turning toward her. The particular social magnetism of someone who had developed very early an acute understanding of how she was perceived, and who had organized her behavior around optimizing that perception. She was also, within the family, the easier child, the one whose wants and moods and needs were more legible and more immediately responded to, partly because she communicated them more directly, and partly because the specific quality of her warmth made responding to her feel like a reward, rather than an obligation. I was quieter. I want to say this in the specific neutral way it deserves because I think the quieter daughter in high-achieving families is sometimes characterized as the difficult one when the truth is more specific than that. I was the daughter who had an interior life that ran deeper and faster than its surface, who processed things before expressing them and who expressed them in the particular register of someone for whom the expression mattered as much as the content of what was expressed. I had the specific quality of the observer, rather than the performer, the person who was always paying close attention to what was happening, rather than directing attention toward herself. I found photography when I was 15. Not as a hobby in the dilettante sense, but in the specific, complete way of someone who has found the thing they were built to do and who understands the finding immediately and without ambiguity. I photographed everything. My family, the neighborhood, the specific quality of Dallas light in the late afternoon, the particular faces of people who did not know they were being watched. I developed the particular seeing that photography requires, which is the ability to understand what an image will be before it exists, to see the decisive moment approaching, and to be positioned and ready when it arrives. My parents supported this with the specific support of people who believe in what their children are doing, while also believing that what their children are doing should be organized toward a sustainable professional path. My father paid for a real camera when I was 16, and a photography class at the Dallas Museum of Art when I was 17, and the specific practical investment of parents who understood that talent without technique was insufficient. He also said, with regularity and with the particular parental consistency of someone who wanted to make sure the message was received, that photography was wonderful and that I should also have a practical degree. I went to the University of Texas for art, the specific choice of someone who had decided that the practical degree would be the photography degree, and who had determined that UT's art program was the specific environment where the technique she had been developing since 15 would be given the particular rigorous academic context that technique required to become mastery. Priya went to SMU for business. She was, in the specific register of her intelligence, a strategist, and the MBA pathway she had identified from an early age was the particular professional trajectory that her specific capabilities most directly served. The divergence of our paths across our 20s was the particular divergence of siblings who are very different kinds of people and who have built very different kinds of lives from a common starting point. And across our 20s, the divergence was the ambient condition of our sisterhood rather than any source of conflict between us. I built a photography practice in Dallas after graduating from UT. Not glamorous work at first, the specific early work of a photographer, building a portfolio and a reputation through the particular patient accumulation of one job, leading to another job, leading to a reputation that produces the calls rather than requiring the chasing. I photographed families and corporate events and the occasional art project and slowly, specifically, the weddings. Wedding photography was not what I had imagined myself doing. I had imagined editorial work, the particular documentary photography that I admired most from the photographers I had studied. What I discovered was that weddings were the specific form of documentary photography that my capabilities were most exactly suited to. The particular challenge of capturing the full emotional and visual truth of a single day. The decisive moments of a day that had only one chance to occur required exactly the kind of seeing I had been developing since I was 15 and walking around Dallas with a camera and learning to see the moment before the moment. I became, across 3 years of building my practice, the specific kind of wedding photographer that couples sought out when they understood the difference between documentation and artistry. My work began to be published in wedding publications. I began to be referred by venues and planners. I built a waiting list. I also fell in love with a man named Marcus Webb, who was a high school art teacher and a painter who worked in the particular register of urban landscape that seemed to me the most honest way of depicting the specific beauty of the city where we both lived, and who had the particular quality of someone whose seeing of the world was as developed as mine, but organized around a different kind of attention, and who found in me someone who understood what the developed seeing required, and what it cost, and what it gave back. We got engaged on a Tuesday evening in October, in the most unceremonic way, which was that Marcus made dinner and set the table with candles, and then said, While I was still standing in the kitchen eating cheese off the cutting board because I was hungry and dinner was taking a while, that he had been thinking about it, and that he would like to spend his life with me, and would I be willing to marry him, and I said yes, with cheese in my mouth, and we laughed about it for the rest of the evening. We planned the wedding for the following April. 11 months. The particular planning timeline of two people who knew what they wanted and who were capable of organizing toward it without requiring a very long runway. I want to tell you about the wedding planning specifically, because the planning is the specific context within which what Priya did becomes comprehensible rather than simply inexplicable. Priya was 30 at the time of our engagement. She was, in the particular register of her social intelligence, someone who had been tracking her own trajectory toward marriage with the specific awareness of someone for whom social milestones had always been significant and who understood at some level that her younger sister getting married before her was a specific kind of disruption to the trajectory she had been managing. She was warm to me when I got engaged. She helped with the planning with the particular engaged warmth of someone who knows about events and who genuinely wants to contribute. She had opinions, the specific helpful opinions of someone whose opinions in aesthetic and logistical matters were often useful, and I incorporated many of her suggestions. She was also, across the 11 months of the planning, paying attention in the particular way she paid attention to things that she was managing, and I noticed this with the specific attentiveness of an older sibling who knows her younger sibling well, and I noted it without acting on it because I did not yet have the specific information required to understand what she was managing toward. I found out 2 weeks before the wedding. I want to tell you what Priya did with the specificity it deserves, because I think the honest account of what happened is more useful than a softened version of it. 2 weeks before the wedding, while I was in the final logistics of the most significant personal event of my adult life, Priya posted a series of photographs on Instagram. The photographs were from my engagement shoot, the specific set of professional photographs that my colleague and friend Jade had taken of Marcus and me in the months after the engagement. Beautiful, intimate photographs that were meant to be shared in the specific context of our wedding, and which I had shared with family members including Priya, in a private folder link I had sent with an explicit note that they were not for public sharing before the wedding. Priya had downloaded the photographs from the private folder link. She had posted 12 of them on her Instagram, which had at the time approximately 4,000 followers from her professional network and her social circle. She had posted them with a caption that I want to reproduce accurately, because accuracy is the specific form of honesty the situation deserves. The caption said, "Something doesn't add up about this engagement. These photos have been cropped. I've seen the originals. Who is the man my sister was actually photographed with before the crop? Asking for anyone who cares about her well-being." She had tagged me, tagged Marcus's name, and tagged the location of the photography studio where we had done the shoot. The photographs had not been cropped. They were exactly as Jade had taken them, with Marcus in every one. There was no other man. There was nothing to ask about. The caption was not a question born from genuine uncertainty. It was a specific fabrication designed to plant the particular suspicion that Marcus had been erased from the photographs and someone else substituted. The implication that our relationship was not what it appeared to be and that something specific was being hidden. 4,000 followers, many of them people who knew me, several of them vendors and planners and colleagues from the wedding photography community, some of them mutual friends. The comments filled within 2 hours. The specific quality of the comments was the particular thing that made the damage most real, which was that many people who responded to the post did not know me well enough to discount the suggestion, and the people who did know me were placed in the specific uncomfortable position of choosing between defending me and staying out of a family situation that was complicated in ways they could not fully see. Marcus saw the post before I did. He called me at 9 in the evening and said, "Zara, have you seen your sister's Instagram?" I had not. I looked at it while he was on the phone with me. I sat for a long time with the phone in my hand and Marcus's voice asking if I was there, and the specific knowledge of what I was looking at and what it meant settling into me in the particular way of things whose full weight takes time to arrive. He said, "Zara?" I said, "I'm here." He said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I need to think." He said, "I know." I said, "I'm going to call you back." I did not call my sister. I want to be specific about this. My first response to what she had done was not confrontation. My first response was to sit with my phone and my camera and to think about what I was looking at and what the specific options were for responding to it and what each option would cost. I also, within 30 minutes of seeing the post, did something that I want to describe because it is the particular action that determined what was available to me 4 years later when it mattered. I documented everything. I took screenshots of the post with the timestamp visible. I took screenshots of every comment. I took screenshots of the private folder link I had sent with the explicit, no public sharing note. I took screenshots of the message thread where I had sent the folder link. I downloaded every photograph from the folder to my own storage to document what had actually been shared and what had been posted. I wrote a dated document describing what I had seen and what I knew about the timeline. I did this because I had spent 6 years as a professional photographer, understanding that documentation was the specific form of protection available to someone who needed the record to speak clearly at a time they could not yet anticipate. I had built my business on meticulous documentation of my work. I applied the same discipline to this specific moment, not because I had a plan for the documentation, but because documentation was the reflex of someone who understood that the accurate record was always worth having, regardless of whether it was ever needed. I also called Jade. Jade was the friend and colleague who had taken the engagement photographs. She had seen the post. She was, in the particular direct way that Jade communicated everything, furious on my behalf and ready to act. I said, "Jade, I need you to document the unedited originals from the shoot, all of them, with metadata intact. Keep them in a folder with a timestamp." She said, "Already done. Do you want me to post a statement?" I said, "Not yet. Let me think about this." I called Marcus back. I told him what I was thinking and what I had done and what I wanted to do. He said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I want to take the post down, and I want to not have a wedding that is associated with this." He said, "By take it down, you mean?" I said, "I want her to take it down. I don't want to engage publicly with it. I want it gone, and I want to have our wedding in 2 weeks without any of this attached to it." He said, "And if she doesn't take it down?" I said, "Then I use the documentation I have to establish the factual record, and we have our wedding anyway." He said, "Zara, this is not the thing to be practical about. This is your sister. This is 2 weeks before our wedding." I said, "I know. And being practical is how I'm going to get through it without letting it become the story." He said, "The wedding or the rest of it?" I said, "Both." I called my mother that night. My mother received what I told her with the particular quality of a woman who has been paying close attention to her 2 daughters for 30 years and who was not, I understood from the quality of her silence when I finished speaking, entirely surprised. She said, "I will speak with Priya." I said, "Mom, what I need is the post to come down and for the wedding to happen without any of this present in it." She said, "Yes." She spoke with Priya. The post came down within the hour. There was no public statement from Priya, no public apology, no public acknowledgement that the caption had been false. The post simply disappeared. The wedding happened 2 weeks later. It was the specific day I had planned with the particular professional attention of someone who understood what a wedding day was and what it required, and the photographs Jade took of it were beautiful, and Marcus and I were married in front of the people we loved, and the day was what it was supposed to be. I did not speak to Priya at the wedding. Not because I made a dramatic point of it, but because she was present in the specific performance mode she occupied in family situations, and I was in the presence of my husband and our friends, and there was nothing that needed to be said between us that the day had room for. I also did not say anything to my parents about the full scope of what she had done. I told my mother the factual account of what had happened. I did not make it a family production. I had a wedding to have and a marriage to begin, and the specific energy that a confrontation with Priya would have required was energy I needed for those things. 3 months after the wedding, Marcus and I moved to Austin. I want to tell you about the 4 years in Austin, because the 4 years are the specific context within which the phone call at 6:47 made sense. I built my practice in Austin. Not from nothing in the specific way of someone who has no foundation, but from the reputation I had built in Dallas, and the portfolio I had developed across 6 years there, and the particular referral network of the wedding photography world, which in Texas is smaller and more connected than people outside it tend to understand. Austin was a different market from Dallas, and the difference was specific. Austin had a particular culture around photography that Dallas did not have in the same way. The particular aesthetic sensibility of a city where creative work was valued in ways that the more traditionally professional culture of Dallas did not express as directly. And my work in Austin found the specific audience that it had been developing toward without my fully knowing what audience I was developing toward. I built a practice that was, within 2 years of moving to Austin, the specific kind of practice that produced a waiting list and a referral rate that made the marketing unnecessary. I photographed weddings and editorial work and the specific intimate documentary projects that I had always wanted to do, the particular long-form photographic narratives of specific communities and specific relationships and specific places. I also received, across those 4 years, specific invitations and recognitions in the wedding photography world that were the particular cumulative evidence of a practice that had reached the quality level that the field recognized. I was featured in 2 significant wedding publications. I was invited to speak at a photography conference in Nashville. I was listed in a significant compilation of the best wedding photographers in the American South, one of 40 photographers across 7 states. Marcus was happy in Austin. He had found a teaching position at a high school in the East Austin neighborhood, and he had, in the particular prolific way of someone whose creative work had found its audience, sold 3 paintings in his first year and 8 in his second, and had the specific momentum of someone who had been building toward something for years and who had arrived at the place where the building produced results. I thought about Priya across those 4 years, not obsessively. In the specific, intermittent way of someone who carries something they have not resolved and who encounters it periodically in the particular quiet of being alone or of a conversation that touches the relevant thing. I thought about what she had done, and I thought about why she had done it, and I thought about what the doing of it told me about her and about our relationship, and none of the thinking produced a resolution because the thinking was not organized around producing one. I had the documentation, the screenshots and the message threads and the private folder link and the dated document describing what I had seen. I had kept them in a folder on my cloud storage labeled simply April, and I had not looked at them since the month after the wedding, when I had organized them into the specific ordered structure that the documentation deserved. I kept them because the reflex of a photographer who has spent her career understanding that the accurate record was always worth having, regardless of whether it was ever needed. 4 years. 6:47 in the morning. Priya's voice. Let me stop here because I want to ask you something directly. Have you ever had the experience of a door opening after 4 years of it being closed, and of standing in front of it and having to decide not what you wanted to do, but who you wanted to be in the moment of the opening? Drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from and what time it is there. Because what I decided when Priya called is the specific thing I want you to understand, and I want you to understand it completely before I tell you what I said. If you have not subscribed yet, please do. I held the phone for a long time after Priya finished speaking. She did not rush me. She waited in the specific silence of someone who is asking something that costs and who understands that the asking has to be received at its own pace. I thought about 4 years. I thought about the photograph post and the caption and what it had done to the 2 weeks before my wedding, and the way Marcus had looked when he called me and said, "Have you seen your sister's Instagram?" I thought about the folder labeled April in my cloud storage and everything in it. I also thought about something else. I thought about what the 4 years had been, and about what I had built in Austin, and about whether the person who had built it was the person who said yes to this call or the person who said no. I said, "What is the venue?" She said, "The Driscoll, downtown Austin." I said, "What time is the ceremony?" She said, 11. "The reception goes until 10 tonight." I said, "My rate for a full wedding day is $4,500. I'll need full access and no interference with how I work." She said, "Yes." I said, "And at some point today, not during the day, after it is over, you and I need to have a conversation." She said, "I know." I said, "A real one, not managed, not performed, real." She said, "I know." "Yes. Whatever you need." I said, "I'll be there at 8:30. I hung up. I called Marcus. He answered on the second ring and said, "What's wrong?" I said, "Nothing is wrong. I need to tell you something." I told him. He was quiet for a moment. He said, "Zara." I said, "Yes." He said, "Are you sure?" I said, "I'm not sure about what it means or what comes after. I'm sure about what I'm doing today." He said, "Why?" I said, "Because she is my sister and her photographer canceled and she doesn't have anyone else. And because the person I want to be doesn't leave someone standing without a photographer on their wedding day, even when the someone is the person who did what she did." He said, "Not even then?" I said, "Especially not then, because doing it then is the specific thing that costs something, and the things that cost something are the things that mean something." He said, "Do you want me to come?" I said, "No. I want you to be here when I get home tonight." He said, "I'll be here." I got dressed. I packed my cameras. The specific preparation of a wedding photographer who has done this many times, the particular checklist of equipment and backup equipment, and the small professional rituals of someone whose attention to preparation was the foundation of their professional reliability. I drove to the Driscoll Hotel in downtown Austin. Priya was in the bridal suite when I arrived at 8:30. She was sitting in front of the mirror in a silk robe, her hair half done, her makeup artist working quietly, and she looked up when I came through the door, and her expression was the specific expression of someone who has been waiting for something they were not certain would arrive, and who is receiving its arrival with the full weight of relief and something more complicated. She said, "You came?" I said I would. She said, "I know." I put down my bags. I took out my camera. I looked at the light in the room, the specific quality of the Driscoll's morning light through the tall windows of the bridal suite, warm and specific and exactly right for what I needed to do. I said, "Can I start?" She said, "Yes." I started photographing. This is the specific thing I want to describe because I think it is the most important part of the day. I photographed Priya's wedding the way I photographed every wedding, which was with my full attention and my complete care, and the particular quality of seeing that I had been developing since I was 15 years old, walking around Dallas with a camera. I did not hold back. I did not make the photographs less than they could have been because of what she had done. I photographed the morning light on her face, and the particular way she held her mother's hand when the photographer capturing the getting ready moments caught the specific thing that no staged photograph could produce, and the moment when she turned in her dress, and the expression that crossed her face was the expression of a woman understanding that the day she had been thinking about for years was actually happening. I photographed her wedding with everything I had. Not because she deserved it or did not deserve it. Because the photographs deserved to be what they could be, and because I was the photographer, and the making of honest and beautiful and true photographs was what I was there to do. The ceremony was at 11. The groom was a man named Rahul, who had the particular quality of someone who was genuinely delighted to be marrying this person, the specific unreserved happiness of someone who was not managing their emotion but simply in it. And the moment when he saw Priya come down the aisle, I was in the exact position I had taken 60 seconds earlier, when I had calculated the specific angle that would capture his face, and the light and the depth of field that would make the moment what it deserved to be. I took 4 photographs in the 2 seconds of that moment. The 4th one was the specific photograph I knew immediately was the one. The particular decisive moment that the 4 years of practice since the Dallas days had been building toward. The one where everything was exactly right, and the truth of the moment was exactly what the frame contained. I photographed 400 guests and a ceremony and a reception and 6 hours of celebration, and I did not stop seeing the whole time. At 9:45 that evening, 15 minutes before the reception ended, I found Priya in the garden off the main reception hall. She was sitting on a stone bench with her shoes off and her bouquet beside her, in the specific way of a bride at the end of a wedding day, who has been present for every moment of it, and who has arrived at the last 15 minutes with the particular combination of exhaustion and completion that a significant day produces. She saw me coming. She said, "The day was beautiful." I said, "Yes." She said, "I've been watching you work, the way you see things. You see things no one else sees." I said, "Yes." She said, "I've been thinking about what to say to you all day. Every time I looked at you, I was thinking about what to say." I said, "What did you come up with?" She said, "Nothing adequate." I said, "Then tell me the specific truth instead of the adequate version." She looked at her hands. She said, "When you got engaged, I was 30. I had been in 2 relationships that ended badly, and I was at the specific point where the trajectory I had been managing for my whole life felt like it was going off course. I had always assumed I would get there before you. Not because I thought you shouldn't get there, because I had always been the one who got places first." She said, "When you got engaged and you were planning the wedding and everything was beautiful and Marcus was exactly the right person, I felt something I did not have a good name for at the time, and that I understand better now. I felt like the story I had been telling myself about who I was and how things worked and what my place in the family was had been disrupted in a specific way I couldn't manage." She said, "I made a decision to disrupt it back." I said, "By planting a false suspicion about Marcus." She said, "Yes." I said, "In public, where the people I worked with could see it." She said, "Yes." I said, 2 weeks before my wedding." She said, "Yes." She said, "I knew when I posted it that it was wrong. I knew in the specific second my finger was on the button that I was doing something that was going to cost you something. I did it anyway because the part of me that was managing the story overrode the part that knew it was wrong." I said, "Why are you telling me this now?" She said, "Because you came today. Because you photographed my wedding the way you photograph everything, which is with everything you have. And because I have spent 4 years carrying what I did and I cannot carry it anymore, and you gave me the day today and I owe you the truth." I said, "Priya, I need to tell you something." She looked at me. I said, "I have documentation of everything you did. The screenshots of the post with the timestamps. The message thread where I sent the private folder link with the explicit no public sharing note. The original photographs from Jade with the metadata. A dated document I wrote the night you posted it describing exactly what I saw and what I knew." She said, "I know." I said, "How do you know?" She said, "Because you're you. You document everything. You've documented everything since you were 15 years old." I always knew if this ever came to a specific point, you would have the complete record. I said, "Has this come to a specific point?" She said, "I don't know. That's up to you." I said, "It hasn't. The documentation exists and it will continue to exist. I'm not going to use it to publicly correct the record or to create a conflict in our family. What I am telling you is that it exists, and that you should understand that I have always known exactly what you did and what it cost, and that I have carried an accurate record of it for 4 years. She said, "Why are you telling me now?" I said, "Because the record is part of the truth of what happened between us, and the truth is what we are talking about." She said, "What do you want, Zara?" I said, "I want to know if you understand what you did. Not whether you are sorry, whether you understand it." She said, "I planted a false suspicion about your husband in a public space 2 weeks before your wedding because I was afraid of what your happiness meant for the story I had been telling myself about my own life. I used your trust, the specific trust of sending your private photographs to your family, as the mechanism to do it. I caused specific harm to your professional reputation in a community where reputation is your professional asset. And I did it with full knowledge that it was wrong while I was doing it." She said, "That is what I understand that I did." I said, "Yes." She said, "Is that enough?" I said, "It's a beginning." She said, "I have been in therapy for 3 years. The therapist said I should not reach out to you until I understood specifically what I had done and why, and that I should not reach out until I was ready to say it in a way that did not make it about my own processing at your expense. I have been ready for 8 months. I did not call because I did not know how to begin." I said, "You called this morning." She said, "You gave me an opening." I said, "The photographer." She said, "The photographer." "Yes." She said, "I knew when I woke up this morning and my photographer had canceled that the specific person I needed and the specific person I owed the most were the same person. I knew that the call was going to be what it was going to be regardless of what you said, and that making the call was the specific thing I had been building toward for 8 months. I said, "Did you think I would say yes?" She said, "No, I thought you might. I was not certain." I said, "What made you think I might?" She said, "Because you're you. And because 4 years ago when everything happened, you did not make it a public conflict. You let the post come down and you had your wedding and you moved to Austin and you built something. You chose the work over the conflict. I thought maybe you would choose it again." I said, "I chose you over the conflict too. Not only the work." She was very quiet. She said, I know that now." I said, "Priya, I'm going to send you the photographs within the week. All of them. The full gallery. What you do with them is up to you." She said, "Why?" I said, "Because they are beautiful, and because you deserve to have them, and because the photographs are what the day was, which was a genuinely beautiful day between 2 people who love each other, and the day deserves to be documented accurately, regardless of everything between us." She said, "Zara." I said, "I am not forgiving you tonight. I want to be honest about that. What happened 4 years ago is not resolved by today. But I am telling you that I am willing to find out what there is between us that is worth building forward from here, and that the starting point of the finding out is this conversation, and that the conversation has to include the truth, and you have told me the truth, and I have told you the truth, and that is where we are." She said, "That is more than I expected." I said, "I know." She said, "Can I call you?" "After today." "Can I call you?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Zara, the photographs. If they are anything like the way you were working today," I said, "they are better than today looked. I could see what I was getting. It was a good day for the work." She said, "Thank you." I said, "Yes." I picked up my camera bag. The reception was ending, the particular winding down of a significant occasion that had arrived at its conclusion, and that was beginning to release the people inside it back into their ordinary lives. I drove home to Marcus. I want to tell you what the months since Priya's wedding have been, because honesty requires telling the full account. Priya called in the week after the wedding to say the photographs had arrived and to say what I knew they would be from the moment I pressed the shutter on the fourth photograph in the sequence of Rahul's face when she came down the aisle. She said it in the specific way she said things when the thing she was saying was more than she expected it to be, which was without the performance of warmth, but with the actual warmth underneath it. She said, "Zara, the photograph of Rahul when he first saw me." I said, "Yes." She said, "How did you know to be in that position?" I said, "I calculated it 60 seconds in advance." I looked at the light and the angle and where he was standing, and I moved to the specific place where I could see his face, and the depth of field could do what I needed it to do, and I was ready when the moment arrived. She said, 60 seconds in advance. I said, "Yes." She said, "And you were right." I said, "The moment was what I thought it would be. Yes." She said, "How do you see things before they happen?" I said, "You learn to read the specific signals that indicate what is about to happen, the way someone's body organizes itself before an emotion arrives, the quality of light at a particular angle at a particular time of day, the way a room feels 60 seconds before the thing that defines the room occurs." She said, "You've been doing this for 13 years. I said, "Yes." She said, "I should have been paying attention to what you were building." I said, "Yes." She said, "I was looking at myself instead." I said, "Yes." She said, "I'm going to try to do better with that." I said, "I know." She said, "Zara, the call I should have made first, not this morning. 4 years ago, after the post came down, I said, the call you should have made 4 years ago." She said, "I should have called and said specifically what I said to you in the garden. Not managed, not adequate. The specific truth." I said, "Yes." She said, "I wasn't ready 4 years ago." I said, "No, you weren't." She said, "Are you angry that I wasn't ready until I needed something from you?" I said, "I have thought about that specifically." She said, "What did you decide?" I said, "That the answer is complicated. That some part of me is angry about the timeline, and that another part of me understands that people are ready when they are ready and not before, and that waiting for the readiness does not always come with the specific timing that the injured party would choose." She said, "That is a very measured answer." I said, "Yes." She said, "Can I ask you something?" I said, "Yes." She said, "The documentation, the folder with the screenshots, do you still have it?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Will you keep it?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Why?" I said, "Because the accurate record is always worth keeping regardless of whether it is ever needed." She said, "You would never use it against me." I said, "I didn't say that." She was quiet. I said, "I kept it because the record mattered, not because of what I was going to do with it. If something had happened that required the record to speak, the record was there to speak. Nothing happened that required it. The record is still there. I'm keeping it because the accurate record of what happened between us is part of the truth of what happened between us, and the truth deserves to be kept accurately." She said, "I understand." I said, "Good." She said, "Zara." I said, "Yes." She said, "I love you. I have loved you in the specific, imperfect way that people love people they have hurt and who they do not know how to be with after the hurting. I want to learn how to be your sister in a way that is worth being." I said, "I want that too." She said, "Can we start from here?" I said, "Yes, from here." I want to tell you what the documentation is and what it is for, because I think this is the specific thing this story has been building toward, and it deserves to be said clearly. The folder labeled April is still in my cloud storage. The screenshots are there. The message thread is there. The dated document is there. The original photographs from Jade with their metadata are there. I look at it approximately once a year, Not from a place of grievance, but from a place of the particular attention that someone who documents things brings to the documents they keep, the specific check of a photographer who understands that the archive is the record and that the record deserves periodic attention. Each time I look at it, I understand something slightly different about what it contains. Not about what Priya did, which I understood on the night of the post. About what I did, which was to keep the record without a specific purpose and to be ready without knowing what I was being ready for, and to build something in Austin for 4 years without organizing the building around the thing in the folder. The building was the answer, not the folder. The folder was just the record. I am 28 years old. I have been photographing since I was 15. I have been building a practice since I was 22. I photographed my sister's wedding 6 months ago, and the photographs are on her wall, and she sends me photographs of the wall periodically with the particular directness she has developed for communicating things that previously she would have managed toward a more comfortable form. The most recent photograph she sent was the one from the garden sequence, the sequence I took in the last hour of the reception when the light had gone long and golden and specific, and the guests had moved indoors, and Priya was standing with her shoes off and her bouquet beside her, and she looked up at the camera with the expression of someone who has been carrying something for a long time and who has, in the specific way of things that take time to arrive, set it down. I took that photograph without knowing what it contained. When I looked at it in editing, I understood what it contained. I sent it to her without comment. She texted back 4 words. She said, "You always see it?" I said, "Yes, I'm starting to." Here is what 4 years of a folder labeled April, and one morning at 6:47, and a long day at the Driscoll Hotel taught me. I know that documentation is not about preparation for a specific conflict. It is about the accurate record of what happened and the particular respect that truth deserves when it is preserved carefully. I kept the folder, not because I was planning to use it, but because the accurate record of what Priya did was worth keeping the same way the accurate record of any real event was worth keeping, and the keeping was its own form of honesty, regardless of whether it was ever deployed. I know that the choice to come to her wedding was not forgiveness, and was not the absence of anger, and was not the performance of the bigger person. It was the specific choice of someone who understood that the way she wanted to be in the world was not organized around what someone else had done, but around what she was building, and that the building required being present in specific moments, regardless of their specific complications. I know that my sister posting those photographs 2 weeks before my wedding was the particular act of someone who was afraid of something she had not yet learned to name, and that fear does not make harm acceptable, but it does make it comprehensible. And comprehensibility is the specific thing that makes resolution possible when the person who caused the harm has done the work of understanding what they did and why. And I know that the photograph of Rahul's face when Priya came down the aisle is the best single photograph I have taken in 13 years of professional photography. Not because of the technical elements, though the technical elements were right. Because I was 60 seconds ahead of the moment and I was in the exact right position and the light was exactly what I needed it to be and the truth of what was happening was exactly what the frame contained. I could not have taken that photograph 4 years ago. Not because I did not have the technical skill, because the specific quality of seeing that the photograph required is the seeing of someone who has been paying very close attention for a very long time to things that are hard to look at, and who has learned through that, looking to find the truth in what she sees, and to put it exactly in the frame. 4 years of carrying something quietly is part of how you develop that kind of seeing. That is my story. A post on Instagram 2 weeks before a wedding. A folder labeled April. 4 years in Austin building something real. A phone call at 6:47. A full day at the Driscoll Hotel. A conversation in the garden when the light had gone long and golden and specific. And a photograph of a man's face the moment he saw the person he loved walking toward him and understood that the rest of his life was beginning. If this reminded you of something you documented carefully, not because you had a plan for it, but because the accurate record was what the situation deserved, I want to hear from you. Drop it in the comments. Share this with someone who is carrying something quietly and who needs to know that the quiet carrying is itself a specific form of building, and that what you build in the quiet is the thing that matters when the moment finally arrives. Hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.